The dust-laden summer heat of 1875 seemed to weigh upon Cora Lancaster's shoulders as she stood on the auction block in Redemption, Arizona territory, her hand resting protectively over the small but unmistakable swell of her 5-month pregnancy. The jeers from the crowd cut deeper than the merciless sun overhead, but she kept her chin lifted, refusing to let them see her break even as the auctioneer rattled off cruel jokes about her condition. "What we got here, gentlemen, is damaged goods, pretty face, but carrying another man's burden." The auctioneer, a portly man with yellowed teeth and whiskey on his breath, circled around her like a vulture. "Starting bid at $15. Who'll take this pregnant filly off our hands?" Laughter rippled through the crowd of men gathered in the dusty town square. Some spat tobacco on the ground, others elbowed each other and made crude remarks. Cora's hands trembled, but she clenched them into fists, digging her nails into her palms until she felt the sting of pain, anything to keep from crying. She'd been sold into indentured servitude to pay off her late husband's gambling debts. Thomas had been dead barely 2 weeks when the creditors came calling, and with no family and no means to support herself, let alone a baby, Cora had found herself at the mercy of a system that saw her as nothing more than property. $20, someone called from the back. $25. Shouted another. "Look at that, Belly, you're buying 2 for the price of 1. The auctioneer's words sent another wave of cruel laughter through the crowd. From the back of the gathering, a tall figure pushed forward. The crowd parted almost instinctively as Preston Yates moved through them, his spurs jingling softly with each deliberate step. His face, partially shadowed by the brim of his worn leather hat, revealed little emotion, but his eyes, sharp and blue as a desert sky, were fixed on Cora. "That's enough," Preston said, his voice quiet but carrying across the suddenly hushed square. The auctioneer faltered, then recovered with a greasy smile. "Well, if it ain't Preston Yates, come to join the bidding, have you? This one might need breaking in gentle-like, considering her condition and all." He winked conspiratorially. Preston's expression didn't change as he reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a leather pouch. $300, he said, tossing the pouch onto the table beside the auctioneer. The coins inside clinked heavily against the wood. A murmur ran through the crowd. $300 was an outrageous sum, enough to buy a decent plot of land or several healthy male laborers. "Now, Mr. Yates," the auctioneer said nervously, "there's no need to." "She's worth more," Preston interrupted, his voice harder now. "But that's all you're getting." His hand moved slightly, revealing the revolver at his hip, not a threat, merely a reminder of its presence. The auctioneer swallowed hard, then nodded, snatching up the pouch. "Sold to Preston Yates for $300. Cora stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. She'd heard of Preston Yates, everyone in the territory had. He owned the largest cattle ranch in the county, the Double Y, and was known as a fair but formidable man. What he wanted with a pregnant woman, she couldn't fathom, and fresh fear bloomed in her chest. Preston climbed the steps to the auction platform and approached her. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, not from age, for he couldn't be much past 30, but from squinting against the sun and wind. His face was tanned and weathered, but handsome in a rugged way. "Madam," he said, inclining his head slightly, "if you'll come with me." When she hesitated, he added in a lower voice, meant only for her ears, "You have my word no harm will come to you or your child." Something in his eyes, a steadiness perhaps, or a hint of kindness carefully hidden, made Cora believe him. With nowhere else to turn and no other options, she nodded once and allowed him to help her down from the platform. The crowd parted again as Preston led her toward a wagon at the edge of the square. His hand hovered near her elbow but didn't touch her, and Cora noticed how he positioned himself between her and the still muttering crowd. "Up you go," he said when they reached the wagon, offering his hand to help her onto the seat. Once she was settled, he climbed up beside her, took the reins, and clicked to the horses. As they pulled away from Redemption, Cora stole a glance at the man beside her. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the creak of the wagon wheels. Preston kept his eyes on the road ahead. "No decent man trades in human lives, madam." But $300 is less than I'd pay for a good horse, he interrupted, then glanced at her. Forgive me, that came out wrong. I only meant the money doesn't matter. They rode in silence for a while, the town falling away behind them as they followed a winding dirt road into rolling grasslands dotted with mesquite and scrub. In the distance, Cora could see mountains rising blue against the horizon. Where are we going? She finally asked. Double Y Ranch. It's about an hour's ride. Preston adjusted his hat against the sun. My housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, will get you settled. You'll have your own room, decent meals, and no one will bother you. Cora's hands tightened in her lap. And what will be expected of me in return? Preston's jaw tightened, and for a moment Cora feared she'd angered him. Then he sighed. Nothing untoward, if that's what you're asking. Mrs. Abernathy needs help with the cooking and housekeeping. The ranch hands keep her busy enough, and she's not as young as she used to be. He glanced at her. Light work only, given your condition. Once the baby comes, we'll figure something out. Cora studied him, trying to understand. Men didn't pay good money for indentured servants without expecting something in return. Yet nothing in Preston Yates's manner suggested he had dishonorable intentions. Why would you do this for a stranger? She pressed. Preston was quiet for so long that Cora thought he wouldn't answer. Then, his voice low and rough, he said, My mother was sold at auction when I was 8 years old. Different circumstances, but the same indignity. His hands tightened on the reins. I swore if I ever had the means to prevent it happening to another, I would. The simple honesty of his words silenced any further questions Cora might have had. They continued the journey in relative quiet, with Preston occasionally pointing out landmarks or explaining aspects of the ranch's operation. As they crested a hill, the double Y spread out before them a sprawling main house with several outbuildings, corrals filled with horses, and beyond, vast pastures where cattle grazed. It was larger and more prosperous looking than Cora had imagined. Home, Preston said simply as they rolled down the hill toward the ranch. A middle-aged woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun emerged from the main house as they approached, wiping her hands on her apron. She watched their arrival with undisguised curiosity. Mrs. Abernathy, Preston called as he brought the wagon to a stop. This is Miss Cora. She'll be staying with us and helping around the house. The housekeeper's sharp eyes took in Cora's condition immediately, but her expression revealed nothing beyond polite interest. I see. Well, come along then, Miss Cora. You look like you could use a good meal and some rest. Preston helped Cora down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist. Mrs. Abernathy will take good care of you, he assured her. I need to check on the herd, but I'll be back by supper. As he turned to go, Cora found her voice. Mr. Yates. When he looked back, she continued, Thank you. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness, but there's nothing to repay, he interrupted gently. Just rest now. Cora watched him walk toward the stables, his tall figure silhouetted against the late afternoon sun. For the first time in months, she felt something other than fear and despair, a small, fragile spark of hope. Mrs. Abernathy clucked her tongue, drawing Cora's attention. Come along, child. Let's get you settled before you drop from heat and exhaustion. The main house was cool and clean, with simple but sturdy furnishings. Mrs. Abernathy led Cora to a small bedroom at the back of the house, where a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt and a washstand with a ceramic basin awaited. It's not fancy, but it's comfortable enough, the housekeeper said. There's clean water in the pitcher if you'd like to wash up. I'll bring you some tea and biscuits. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in weeks. Cora sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed. Thank you, she whispered. Mrs. Abernathy lingered in the doorway, her expression softening slightly. Mr. Yates is a good man, she said after a moment. One of the few genuine articles left in this God-forsaken territory. Whatever your story is, and we all have one out here, you're safe now. After the housekeeper left, Cora allowed herself to truly relax for the first time in months. She poured water into the basin and washed her face and hands, then sat back on the bed, her palm resting on the swell of her belly where her child moved gently. We're safe, she whispered, and for the first time she believed it might actually be true. The days at Double Y fell into a rhythm that Cora found both comforting and healing. True to his word, Preston ensured she was given only light duties, helping Mrs. Abernathy with meal preparation, mending clothes, and keeping the main house tidy. The work was far from the brutal labor she had feared when standing on that auction block. Mrs. Abernathy, gruff but kind-hearted, proved to be an unexpected ally. She showed Cora how to make campfire bread that the ranch hands devoured, taught her to recognize the medicinal plants that grew wild on the ranch, and in the evenings, helped her sew baby clothes from scraps of fabric. "Been a while since we had a little one around these parts," the housekeeper remarked one evening as they sat on the porch, their needles flashing in the golden light of sunset. "Brings a different energy to a place." Preston himself remained something of a mystery to Cora. He was often away from the main house, riding out at dawn to check on the cattle or negotiate with buyers in town. When he was present, he was unfailingly polite but maintained a certain distance. He took his meals with the ranch hands in the cookhouse more often than not, though occasionally he would join Cora and Mrs. Abernathy at the kitchen table, listening more than talking, his eyes sometimes lingering on Cora when he thought she wasn't looking. 2 weeks after her arrival, Cora was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Preston rode in, looking tired but satisfied, his horse lathered from a long ride. "Afternoon, Miss Cora," he called, dismounting with the fluid grace that came from a lifetime in the saddle. "Mr. Yates," she acknowledged with a nod, pinning one of his shirts to the line. The domestic intimacy of handling his clothing still made her blush sometimes. He led his horse toward the stables, then paused. "Would you care to take a short walk later? There's something I'd like to show you." Surprised by the invitation, Cora hesitated before nodding. "I'd like that." After finishing with the laundry, she found Preston waiting by the corral, his hat in his hands. He'd washed up and changed his shirt, she noticed. "It's not far," he assured her, falling into step beside her as they walked away from the main buildings. "How are you feeling today?" "Well enough," Cora replied. "The baby has been active." A smile touched the corners of Preston's mouth. "Mrs. Abernathy says that means a healthy child." They walked in comfortable silence until they reached a small rise overlooking a creek that ran through the property. A lone cottonwood tree provided shade, and beneath it sat a wooden bench weathered by years of sun and rain. "My father built this bench for my mother," Preston explained as they sat down. "She loved this spot, said it was where she could think most clearly." Cora looked out over the view, rolling grasslands stretching toward distant mountains, the creek a silver ribbon cutting through the landscape. "It's beautiful." "It is," Preston agreed, though when she glanced at him, he was looking at her rather than the scenery. He cleared his throat and looked away. "I wanted to talk to you about your situation." Cora's stomach tightened with apprehension. "Has my work been unsatisfactory?" "No, nothing like that," Preston quickly assured her. "You've been a great help to Mrs. Abernathy, but I've been thinking about the future, yours and the baby's." He twisted his hat in his hands, a gesture that revealed a rare nervousness in the usually composed rancher. "The thing is, Miss Cora, folks around here are bound to talk. A single woman living at a bachelor's ranch expecting a child. It could make things difficult for you." "I'm already aware of how people talk, Mr. Yates," Cora said quietly, remembering the jeers and mockery at the auction. Preston nodded. "Of course, I just meant," he broke off, seemed to gather his thoughts. "I have a proposition for you, a business arrangement if you will." Cora waited, her heart beating a little faster. "I propose a marriage of convenience," he finally said, looking her directly in the eyes. "You would have the protection of my name, and your child would be raised without the burden of unfortunate circumstances. The ranch would provide security for both of you." Cora stared at him, stunned. "You want to marry me, but you hardly know me." "I know enough," Preston replied. "You're strong, resilient, and you work hard. Those are qualities I respect." His expression softened slightly. "I'm not asking for anything personal. It would be a partnership, nothing more. You'd have your own room, just as you do now." "And what would you gain from this arrangement?" Cora asked, struggling to understand his motivation. Preston looked out over his land. "Running this ranch alone isn't easy. Having a proper household would help establish stability, and if I'm being honest, I'm not getting any younger." I've always wanted children, but never found the right woman to settle down with. He glanced at her. Your child would have my name, a good home, opportunities. It was a generous offer, more than generous, it was life-changing. Yet Cora hesitated, unwilling to bind herself to another man so soon after being freed from one form of servitude. I don't know what to say, she admitted. You don't need to answer now, Preston assured her. Think about it. Talk to Mrs. Abernathy if you like. She'll give you an honest assessment of what life with me might be like. He stood up, settling his hat back on his head. Whatever you decide, you have a place here for as long as you need it. As they walked back to the house, Cora's mind whirled with possibilities. Marriage to Preston Yates would give her child legitimacy, a name, a future free from the stigma of being born to a woman who had been sold at auction. It would mean security in a world that offered precious little to women alone. But what of love? Her marriage to Thomas had begun with love, or what she'd thought was love, before gambling and drink revealed his true character. Preston was offering something different, a partnership based on mutual benefit rather than emotion. Perhaps that was more honest, more likely to endure. That night, after a simple supper during which Preston had been politely distant, giving her space to think, Cora sought out Mrs. Abernathy in the kitchen. He told me about his proposal, Cora said without preamble as she helped the older woman dry dishes. Mrs. Abernathy nodded, unsurprised. I figured he might. Been planning it for days, I reckon. What kind of man is he, truly? Cora asked, not just as an employer but as a person. The housekeeper considered the question as she scrubbed a pot. Honorable to a fault, stubborn as a mule when he believes he's right. Works harder than any man I've known, she glanced at Cora. He doesn't show it much, but he's got a gentle heart. His mother saw to that before she was taken away. What happened to her? Cora asked quietly. Mrs. Abernathy's face tightened. His father lost everything gambling, the ranch, the livestock, even his wife. Preston was just a boy. He watched his mother sold to a man from California, never saw her again. His father drank himself to death within the year. Cora's hand went to her belly, a protective gesture. How did Preston end up with the ranch? Worked like a demon from the time he was old enough to hire on as a hand, saved every penny. When the property came up for sale years later, he bought it back. Mrs. Abernathy set down her washcloth. That's the kind of man he is, Miss Cora. When he sets his mind to something, he sees it through. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Cora weighed her options. She had little to offer a man like Preston Yates beyond her labor and gratitude, yet he seemed to think that was enough. Perhaps in time, there might be more between them, if not love, then at least affection and respect. The alternative was to refuse and eventually make her own way, facing the world's judgment alone with a fatherless child. The thought made her shiver despite the warm night. By morning, Cora had made her decision. She found Preston in the stables, checking a horse's injured leg. Mr. Yates, she said, standing in the doorway. He straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. Miss Cora. I've considered your proposal, she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. I accept with one condition. Preston's expression revealed nothing, but she noticed his shoulders relax slightly. Name it. I want to be a true partner in this marriage, Cora said. Not just in name or in running the household, but in decisions that affect the ranch and our future. I won't be a silent wife. A slow smile spread across Preston's face, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. I wouldn't expect anything less, he said. Partners, then. He held out his hand, and after a moment, Cora took it. His palm was warm and calloused against hers, his grip firm but gentle. It felt like sealing a pact, the beginning of something new and undefined but full of possibility. There's a circuit preacher coming through next week, Preston said. Would that be soon enough? Cora nodded, acutely aware that he hadn't released her hand. Yes, that would be fine. For a moment they stood there, connected by their clasped hands and the agreement between them. Then Preston cleared his throat and let go, turning back to the horse. I should finish here. Mrs. Abernathy will be pleased with the news. As Cora walked back to the house, she felt oddly light, as if a weight had been lifted. The future still held uncertainty, but for the first time since Thomas's death, she could see a path forward, one that didn't lead through shame and hardship. The wedding was a simple affair. performed in the main room of the ranch house with only Mrs. Abernathy and a few of the senior ranch hands as witnesses. Cora wore a blue dress that Mrs. Abernathy had altered to accommodate her growing belly, with wildflowers from the creek bank woven into her hair. Preston had ridden to town and returned with a plain gold band that fit her finger perfectly. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the circuit preacher declared after they had exchanged vows. "You may kiss your bride." Preston hesitated, then leaned forward and pressed a chaste kiss to Cora's cheek. The gentle gesture, unexpected in its tenderness, brought a flush to her face. Mrs. Abernathy had prepared a special dinner, and the ranch hands toasted the couple with whiskey while Cora sipped cider. There was music from a fiddle and harmonica, even some dancing, though Cora mostly watched from her seat, her hand resting on her belly where the baby kicked energetically, as if joining the celebration. As darkness fell, the hands returned to their bunkhouse, leaving the newlyweds alone with Mrs. Abernathy, who tactfully retired early with a knowing smile that made Cora blush again. "I've moved my things to the main bedroom," Preston said when they were alone. "Your room is still yours, of course," Cora nodded, grateful for his adherence to their agreement, yet strangely disappointed as well. "Thank you." An awkward silence fell between them. Finally, Preston said, "Would you like to sit on the porch for a while? The night is pleasant." They sat side by side on the porch swing, looking out at the star-filled sky. The rhythmic creaking of the swing and the chorus of night insects created a peaceful backdrop to their quiet conversation as Preston pointed out constellations and told stories about the ranch's history. "My mother loved nights like this," he said. "She taught me all the stars' names before I could even read." "She sounds like a remarkable woman," Cora said softly. Preston nodded. She would have liked you." The simple statement, offered without pretense, touched Cora deeply. On impulse, she reached over and placed her hand over his where it rested on the swing between them. Preston looked surprised, then turned his hand to clasp hers gently. "I will try to be a good husband to you, Cora," he said, using her given name for the first time. "And a good father to your child. Our child now," Cora corrected him gently. "That was our agreement." Preston's eyes, silver in the moonlight, met hers. "Yes," he said, "our child." Something shifted between them in that moment, not love, not yet, but the possibility of it, a seed planted that might, with care and patience, grow into something beautiful. When they finally said goodnight at Cora's door, Preston surprised her again by lifting her hand to his lips and placing a gentle kiss on her knuckles. "Sleep well, Mrs. Yates." The new name, his name, sounded strange but not unwelcome to Cora's ears. "Good night, Preston," she replied, testing the intimacy of his first name on her tongue. As summer gave way to fall, Cora and Preston settled into a routine that gradually bridged the gap between their initial business arrangement and a true marriage. Preston still spent long days working the ranch, but he now took his meals regularly with Cora, sharing stories of his day and asking about hers. In the evenings, they often sat on the porch or by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes comfortable in shared silence. Cora found unexpected fulfillment in her role as the ranch's mistress. She kept the account books, discovering a talent for numbers that Preston readily acknowledged and respected. She started a vegetable garden that flourished under her care, and she made it a point to learn each ranch hand's name and story. "You've changed this place," Mrs. Abernathy remarked one day as they picked late tomatoes together. "It feels like a home now, not just a working ranch." Cora smiled, one hand supporting her back as she straightened. At nearly 8 months pregnant, her movements had become more deliberate. "It is a home," she said, realizing as she spoke that she truly felt that way. The double Y had become her home, and Preston, still reserved but increasingly attentive, had become central to that feeling. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Preston watching Cora knit a tiny cap for the baby, he cleared his throat. "I've been thinking," he began, "about where the baby will sleep." Cora looked up, her needles pausing. "I assumed in my room at first." "Of course," Preston agreed quickly, "but I thought perhaps, that is, if you wouldn't mind." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Cora had come to recognize as a sign of nervousness. The room between ours could be made into a nursery. I could build a cradle. The suggestion itself was practical, but it was the underlying implication that caught Cora's attention. The room between ours acknowledged their separate sleeping arrangements while suggesting a shared responsibility for the child that would connect their spaces. I think that would be perfect, Cora said, her heart warming at the thought of Preston crafting a cradle with his own hands. His answering smile, rare and genuine, sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. Over the weeks, she had begun to notice these reactions more frequently, a quickening of her pulse when he entered a room, a lingering awareness of his presence, a pleasure in the small, everyday intimacies they were beginning to share. One crisp October morning, Cora woke to the sound of hammering. Curious, she dressed carefully, her movements slowed by her advanced pregnancy, and followed the noise to what would become the nursery. Preston was there, sleeves rolled up, working on what was clearly going to be a cradle. The wood was cherry, rich and warm-toned, and he was carving a delicate pattern along the side, wild roses twining among stars. He looked up as she entered, a smudge of sawdust on his cheek. "I wanted to surprise you when it was finished," he said, looking slightly embarrassed at being caught. Cora moved closer, running her fingers over the smooth wood and intricate carving. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Where did you learn to do this?" "My father taught me before." Preston trailed off, then continued more softly. "It's one of the few good things he gave me." Without thinking, Cora reached out and brushed the sawdust from his cheek. Preston went still under her touch, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a moment she thought he might lean in, might finally kiss her properly as a husband might kiss his wife. Instead, he caught her hand and pressed it gently. "I hope the baby likes it," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "The baby will love it," Cora assured him, ignoring the small pang of disappointment. "As do I." The moment passed, but something had changed between them, a line crossed, though neither quite acknowledged it. In the days that followed, Preston found more reasons to be at the house, and Cora found herself looking for opportunities to be near him, to share the small discoveries of her day, to see his rare smiles. As her time grew near, Preston insisted on hiring a midwife to stay at the ranch. Martha Wilson was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had delivered half the babies in the county. She moved into a room off the kitchen and spent her days teaching Cora what to expect and preparing for the birth. "Your husband's mighty concerned about you," Martha observed one afternoon as she showed Cora how to swaddle a baby using one of Mrs. Abernathy's flour sacks as a stand-in. "Asks me twice a day if you're doing all right." Cora smiled, warmed by the knowledge. "He's been very kind." Martha gave her a shrewd look. "Kind, is it? Well, I've seen the way he watches you when you're not looking. That's more than kindness, if you ask me." The midwife's words stayed with Cora, making her more aware of the glances Preston sent her way, the careful attention he paid to her comfort, the gentle touches that had become more frequent, a hand at the small of her back, fingers brushing as he passed her a cup of coffee, the way he sometimes tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when they sat together in the evening. One night, unable to get comfortable in her bed, Cora rose and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, intending to sit on the porch for a while. She was surprised to find Preston already there, staring out at the moonlit landscape. "Can't sleep?" he asked, making room for her on the swing. "The baby is restless tonight," Cora explained, settling beside him, "and my back aches." Without hesitation, Preston shifted on the swing. "Turn a bit," he instructed gently. When she did, his strong hands began to knead the tight muscles of her lower back. "Is this all right?" he asked, his voice close to her ear. "Yes," Cora breathed, closing her eyes as his fingers worked their magic. "That feels wonderful." They sat like that for some time, his hands moving in steady circles, easing the discomfort that had plagued her all day. The intimacy of the moment, his touch, the quiet night around them, their soft breathing created a bubble of connection that felt new and precious. "Preston," Cora said quietly, breaking the silence. "May I ask you something?" His hands paused briefly, then resumed their gentle work. "Anything." "Are you happy? With our arrangement, I mean." For a long moment, Preston was silent, and Cora worried she had overstepped. Then his hands stilled, coming to rest lightly on her shoulders as he spoke. When I offered marriage, I thought it would be enough to provide for you and the child, to give you both security and my name, he said slowly. I didn't expect. I never thought I would come to care for you the way I do. Cora turned to face him, her heart pounding. And how is that? In the silver moonlight, Preston's face was open, vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. More than I should, perhaps, more than our agreement called for. Our agreement was for a partnership, Cora reminded him softly. But partnerships can change, can't they, grow into something more? Preston's eyes searched hers. Is that what you want, Cora? Instead of answering with words, Cora leaned forward and pressed her lips to his a gentle, questioning kiss that held all the tender feelings that had been growing in her heart over the past months. For a heartbeat, Preston remained still, and Cora feared she had misread everything. Then his hand came up to cradle her cheek, and he returned the kiss with a sweet intensity that left no doubt about his feelings. When they finally parted, Preston rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since our wedding day, he confessed. Cora smiled, joy bubbling up inside her. Why didn't you? I didn't want you to feel obligated. I wanted you to choose me if you ever did because you wanted to, not because you felt you owed me something. I choose you, Cora whispered, placing her hand over his heart. Not out of obligation, but because you are a good man, Preston Yates, a man worth choosing. He kissed her again, more deeply this time, his arms encircling her as much as her rounded belly would allow. It was a new beginning, a shift from their arranged marriage to something real and precious, a love growing like a prairie flower after rain, unexpected and beautiful. When they finally retired to their rooms that night, it was with reluctance and the sweet promise of a future where separate bedrooms might no longer be necessary. The labor began 3 days later, in the pre-dawn hours. Cora woke to a sharp pain and a sudden wetness and called out for Martha. The midwife came quickly, assessed the situation with practiced efficiency, and sent Mrs. Abernathy to alert Preston. First babies often take their time, Martha assured Cora as she helped her change into a clean nightgown. We've got a long day ahead of us, likely. Preston appeared in the doorway, his hair disheveled from sleep, his eyes wide with concern. Cora, Martha shooed him back. No place for a man this. Mrs. Abernathy will keep you informed. Before the door closed, Preston's eyes met Cora's. I'll be right outside if you need anything. Anything at all. Through the long hours that followed, as pain racked her body and fear mingled with determination, Cora held onto that promise. Occasionally, she would hear Preston's voice in the hallway, questioning Martha or Mrs. Abernathy, his concern evident even through the closed door. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room, Martha announced that it was finally time to push. Cora, exhausted beyond anything she had ever experienced, found a last reserve of strength. That's it, girl, Martha encouraged. I can see the head, one more big push now. With a cry that tore from the depths of her being, Cora pushed, and suddenly the room filled with the indignant wail of a newborn. You have a daughter, Martha announced, placing the squirming, red-faced infant on Cora's chest. A beautiful, healthy girl. Tears streamed down Cora's face as she gazed at her daughter's tiny, perfect fingers, a shock of dark hair, a determined little chin. Hello, little one, she whispered. I've been waiting so long to meet you. After Martha had cleaned and swaddled the baby and helped Cora into a fresh nightgown, she went to the door. There's a very anxious man out here who'd like to meet his daughter, she said with a smile. Preston entered cautiously, his eyes immediately finding Cora and the bundle in her arms. The expression on his face, wonder mixed with something that looked very much like love, brought fresh tears to Cora's eyes. Come meet your daughter, she said, holding out one hand to him. Preston approached the bed and sat carefully on its edge, his gaze fixed on the tiny face peeking out from the blankets. She's perfect, he breathed. Would you like to hold her? Cora asked. With infinite care, Preston took the baby, cradling her as if she were made of the finest porcelain. Hello, little lady, he said, his voice gentle in a way Cora had never heard before. Welcome to the world. The baby yawned, her tiny mouth forming a perfect O, and Preston laughed softly. I think she likes me. Of course she does, Cora said, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "You're her father." Preston looked up sharply, his eyes searching hers. "Do you mean that?" "With all my heart," Cora assured him. "You're the only father she will ever know, and I couldn't wish for a better one." Preston leaned forward and kissed Cora tenderly, mindful of the baby between them. "Thank you," he whispered against her lips. "For her, for us, for everything." They named her Elizabeth Hope Yates, Elizabeth after Preston's mother, hope for the future they were building together. That night, Preston moved the cradle he had made into Cora's room and kept vigil beside them both as they slept, his heart fuller than he had ever imagined it could be. In the weeks that followed, Preston proved to be a devoted father, proudly showing Elizabeth off to the ranch hands, rocking her when she was fussy, and watching in fascination as she began to discover the world around her. He was equally attentive to Cora, bringing her wildflowers from his rides, reading to her in the evenings while she nursed the baby, and learning, day by day, how to be not just a provider and protector, but a true partner and lover. One evening, when Elizabeth was nearly 2 months old and sleeping peacefully in her cradle, Preston came to Cora with a small wooden box in his hands. "I have something for you," he said, sitting beside her on the sofa. "Something I've been saving for the right moment." Curious, Cora opened the box to find a delicate gold locket. Inside was a tiny portrait of Elizabeth, her eyes bright and curious. "Preston, it's beautiful," Cora breathed as he fastened it around her neck. "There's room for another portrait on the other side," he said. "For our next child, perhaps, if you wanted more, that is." Cora looked up at him, seeing the question in his eyes. "I would like that very much," she said. "A brother or sister for Elizabeth, a family built on love, not just circumstance." Preston's smile was radiant as he pulled her into his arms. "I never thought I could be this happy," he confessed against her hair. "Never thought I would find someone who would make this house a home, who would see past my rough edges to the man underneath." "I see you," Cora assured him, lifting her face for his kiss. "I've always seen you, from that first day in redemption when you said I was worth more." "You are worth everything," Preston murmured, his lips finding hers in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. In the years that followed, the Double Y Ranch flourished under their joint care. Elizabeth grew into a spirited, intelligent girl with her mother's determination and her father's kindness. She was joined by a brother, James, 2 years later, and eventually by twin sisters who completed their family. Preston and Cora's marriage became legendary in the territory, a love story that had begun with an act of compassion at an auction block and blossomed into a partnership of equals, a haven of warmth and love in the harsh frontier. Sometimes, visitors to the ranch would hear the story, usually from Mrs. Abernathy, who never tired of telling it, of how Preston Yates had paid $300 for a pregnant woman being mocked at auction, declaring she was worth more. Few understood that the true value Preston had found that day wasn't measured in dollars, but in the love that had transformed them both. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Preston took Cora back to the cottonwood tree by the creek where he had first proposed their marriage of convenience. The bench was weathered but still sturdy, and they sat together, watching the sunset paint the landscape in gold and crimson. "Any regrets?" Preston asked, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. Cora looked up at the man who had saved her, whom she had in turn saved from loneliness, and shook her head. "Not one," she said. "Every step, every moment led us here, and here is exactly where I want to be." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Preston and Cora walked hand in hand back to their home, where their children waited, where their story continued to unfold in the daily rhythm of love freely given and joyfully returned. In a land where worth was often measured in gold or cattle or land, they had discovered the most valuable treasure of all, a love born of compassion, nurtured by respect, and destined to endure.